Welcome, dear listener. As the world outside fades into quiet, find a comfortable space, take a deep breath, and let the gentle rhythm of this story carry you into a restful slumber. Let the soothing rhythm of the snowflakes falling gently around you, guide your thoughts. As Era embarks on her journey to find balance, to uncover the warmth she buried deep within her heart. Let go of the worries of the day, close your eyes, and allow the story to guide you into a night of peace and dreams. The story begins now. Era had always held winter close to her heart. As a child, she wandered the frostbitten forests in her homeland, enamored with the quiet that settled over the world beneath a blanket of snow. She would watch how the trees turned skeletal and silver under layers of frost, how the moon glowed brighter against the blackened sky. Her only companion, the chill that whispered through the stillness. As she grew into her magic, she found herself able to conjure ice and snow with a flick of her fingers. Each spell a brushstroke on a canvas only she could see. The villagers spoke of her with both awe and trepidation, calling her the Winter Witch, as if her magic was something born of the cold rather than of her. And in a way, they weren't wrong. Era's magic was intrinsically tied to winter, as if the two were woven together in a fabric of frost and shadow. But even as she grew more powerful, her enchantments and spells touching every inch of the snow-laden woods, there remained a hunger in her, an unquenchable yearning to turn her forest into a timeless realm of winter. One night, when the moon hung low and full, casting silvery beams that glistened off the untouched snow, Era decided that she would no longer be satisfied with the passing seasons. Why should spring ever return? Why should green leaves replace the intricate lace of frost that adorned the trees? And so, drawing deep from within herself, Era wove her most powerful spell yet, a spell to capture winter and seal it within her forest forever. At first, the spell seemed to work just as she had imagined. The snow lay thicker, unmelted by the usual cycles of the sun, and the trees took on a permanent sheen of ice as though adorned with jewels. Animals adapted, their fur growing thicker, and even the whispers of the trees seemed to sing a lullaby of winter peace. Ira felt a strange elation, a triumph that her forest would remain this way for all time. But as days passed, Era began to notice things that unnerved her. The snow did not simply settle upon her forest, but seemed to spread, spilling over the borders, creeping out to the villages, reaching farther with every passing night. It was as if the forest itself had taken her spell and magnified it 100-fold, spilling winter across the land. First, the streams froze solid, cutting off the villagers' water. Then, fields that had already begun to sprout turned brittle and white, stifling crops that would never see the light of spring. Aira tried to contain her spell, to draw back the tendrils of frost reaching outward, but the magic was unyielding, as if it had taken on a life of its own. She would stand in the heart of her forest, her hands outstretched, calling back the icy wind, but it merely laughed as it rushed past her, leaving her hair tangled with frost. She was no longer its master, she was its prisoner. Villagers soon gathered at the edge of the forest, muttering her name in fearful tones, their breaths visible in the frigid air. Aira could sense their resentment, their growing anger that she had caused this eternal winter that choked the life from their fields and frosted their homes. She kept herself hidden from them, cloaked in snow and shadow, watching as they turned away, shivering against the relentless cold. She knew she could not face them until she had restored balance, until she had righted the wrong she had unknowingly unleashed. As weeks bled into months and the frost only grew, Aira began to realize the depth of her mistake. This was no mere winter. It was an entity, a force that pulsed and grew, feeding on her desire, her ambition to create something timeless and perfect. She felt it lurking at the edges of her mind, an insatiable hunger that devoured every bit of warmth and light, replacing it with ice and silence. This was no ordinary spell, but a manifestation of her own unchecked power, a part of herself that she could no longer control. One winter's night, as the wind howled through the trees, she whispered into the silence, a promise spoken into the frost. She would seek the heart of this endless winter, find the source of her power that had become a curse, and end the spell that had bound her forest and herself in eternal ice. She would journey into the depths of the forest, into the unknown realms of her own making, to face the force she had set free. And thus, with the weight of 1,000 snowflakes upon her shoulders, Aira set out on her journey, leaving behind only the silence of snow and the distant, haunting echoes of winter's relentless grip. Aira moved deeper into her enchanted forest, her footsteps muffled by the thick, unyielding snow. Each step felt as if it pulled her further into the unknown, a journey not just through the forest, but into the very heart of her magic, where secrets slumbered like winter beasts waiting to wake. The trees loomed taller and darker, their branches twisted and heavy with icicles that shimmered like frozen stars. She could feel the cold intensifying, pressing against her skin and winding through her heart as if testing her resolve. The forest was different now, shifting and alive in ways that unsettled her. Paths that she had known since childhood twisted into unfamiliar trails, leading her deeper into pockets of silence where not even the wind dared to stir. She noticed figures in the shadows, glimpses of silver ice, creatures of snow and frost that seemed to watch her, some in silence, others whispering in tones too low to understand. These creatures had never roamed her forest before. They were manifestations of her own spell, born from the icy magic that now bound the forest. Then, one night as the moon hung low in the sky, Era met the fox spirit. It appeared as if from nowhere, its fur a brilliant white that gleamed against the snow, and its eyes a sharp, unblinking blue, filled with a wisdom that felt as ancient as winter itself. The fox padded quietly toward her, leaving no trace in the snow, its gaze fixed upon her with a strange mix of curiosity and something else. A warning, perhaps, or a judgment. "You wander too deep, witch," the fox spirit spoke, its voice soft as snowfall, yet echoing with an authority that left no room for doubt. "Your spell has created more than you realize. You are not alone in this forest any longer." Era looked into the fox's eyes, feeling as though it could see not only her, but through her, to the very heart of her intentions, her desire for endless winter, and the mistake that desire had become. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling as the words slipped into the cold air. "I thought I controlled this magic. I thought it was mine." The fox tilted its head, a slight smile tugging at its narrow snout. "Magic is never truly owned. It is borrowed, guided, but it has a life of its own. Your desire has given it shape, a consciousness that has grown beyond your reach." Era felt the weight of the fox's words settle like ice in her bones. She had felt it too, the power stirring within the winter she had created, something that pulsed and breathed as if it held a life separate from her own. "How can I find it? How can I stop it?" The fox's eyes narrowed, glinting with a secret it was reluctant to share. "In the heart of this forest, there is an ancient ice palace, built not by hands but by winter itself, a reflection of your own soul. Within it lies the core of your spell, the very essence of the eternal winter you unleashed. But know this, witch. There is a guardian, a being forged from your magic, the spirit of winter made flesh, an entity who will not allow you to break the spell easily. You may know it as the ghost of frost." The name sent a chill through her, a chill colder than any she had ever conjured. She had sensed something within the depths of her magic, a presence that whispered to her in dreams and shadows. The ghost of frost, the entity born from her own enchantment, a creature as much a part of her as the winter she loved. "Will you face it?" the fox asked, its eyes softer now, almost sympathetic. "It will be as if you are battling your own heart. It is no mere spirit. It holds your ambition, your desires, and your fears. It will fight to survive, just as fiercely as you." Era took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs and solidifying her resolve. "I must face it. I cannot let this winter consume everything. I have to make this right." The fox gave a single nod, its form shimmering for a brief moment as though it were fading, becoming one with the snow. "Then go to the palace, witch. But remember, courage alone will not be enough. You must understand the price of what you seek to undo. Only when you embrace the warmth you have buried in yourself will the ghost of frost weaken. With those final words, the fox spirit disappeared into the shadows, leaving Ira alone once more, surrounded by a silence that felt heavier, darker. Determined, she pressed onward, her footsteps guided by a newfound purpose, yet shadowed by a growing sense of foreboding. She knew now what awaited her in the heart of her forest. A creature forged from her own desires and regrets. A ghost that wore the face of her ambition. And as she walked, the forest seemed to close in around her, shifting like a living maze, pulling her ever closer to the ice palace and the ghost of frost that awaited her within. The ice palace emerged from the darkness like a dream made solid. Its spires stretched into the starless sky, their edges sharp and crystalline, shimmering with an unnatural glow. The structure appeared to pulse with life, as if it were breathing, exhaling frost into the air that swirled in delicate patterns around its towers. Era stood at its gates, her breath fogging in the cold, her heart pounding with a mixture of awe and dread. The gates groaned open as she approached, an invitation as much as a warning. Inside, the air was colder than anything she had ever felt, a deep, biting chill that seemed to sink into her very soul. The floor beneath her feet was a mosaic of frozen patterns, each intricate design seeming to shift and move as though alive. Icicles hung like jagged teeth from the vaulted ceiling, their tips dripping with frozen time. And then she saw it. At the center of the grand hall stood a figure, motionless yet radiating a presence that made the air heavier with every breath she took. The figure appeared almost human, draped in a cloak of shifting frost that sparkled like stars. Its face was obscured, a blur of light and shadow, but its eyes, cold and piercing, locked onto Aira with an intensity that froze her in place. "You have come," the figure said, its voice as soft as falling snow, but laced with a power that echoed through the hall. At last, Ira swallowed hard, summoning every ounce of courage to step closer. "Are you the ghost of frost?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. The figure tilted its head, and for a moment, its features shifted, becoming a reflection of her own face, pale and rimed with frost. "I am," it replied. "I am the heart of your spell, the essence of the winter you created. I am your ambition, your yearning, your fear. And I am the guardian of what you sought to make eternal." Era felt the weight of the words settle over her like a fresh layer of snow. This was not just a creature of magic. It was a part of her, as much a reflection of her soul as the ice palace itself. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, her voice trembling. "I only wanted to preserve the beauty of winter, not destroy everything else." The ghost of Frost's eyes narrowed, glinting like shards of ice. And yet you did. Your desire to hold on to winter was born not of love, but of fear. Fear of change, fear of loss. That fear gave me life, and now I will not be unmade so easily. The air around them grew colder, the frost creeping up the walls and across the floor. The ghost's cloak flared like a storm, and with a wave of its hand, the room filled with a swirling tempest of snow and ice. Era raised her arms, summoning her own magic to shield herself. But the force of the storm was overwhelming, battering her defenses and forcing her back. "You cannot defeat me," the ghost said, its voice rising above the roar of the wind. "I am everything you are. To fight me is to fight yourself." Era gritted her teeth, her hands trembling as she cast a barrier of ice to hold back the storm. "Then I will face you," she said, her voice steady, despite the cold seeping into her bones. "I will not let you destroy everything I love." The ghost laughed, a sound like the cracking of glaciers. "Love? You buried that long ago, beneath your ambition. Show me this love, if it still exists, and perhaps I will believe you." The storm raged on, but in that moment, Era realized the truth in the ghost's words. She had buried her warmth, her compassion, in her quest to create something eternal. She had let her fear and ambition overshadow the very things that had made winter beautiful to her in the first place. Lowering her hands, Era let the barrier dissolve. She closed her eyes, focusing not on the cold, but on the warmth she still carried deep within her. The memory of her first snowfall, the laughter of children playing in the snow, the quiet joy of a frost-kissed morning. She let that warmth fill her, radiating outward like the first rays of spring. The storm began to falter, the wind slowing, the snowflakes falling gently to the ground. The ghost of frost staggered, its form flickering as if it were being unraveled. What are you doing?" it demanded, its voice no longer cold and commanding, but filled with uncertainty. "I'm remembering," Era said, her voice steady. "I'm remembering why I loved winter in the first place. And it wasn't because it was eternal. It was because it was fleeting, beautiful in its impermanence." The ghost let out a cry, a sound that echoed through the hall like the shattering of ice. Its form wavered, shrinking and dimming, until it was nothing more than a faint glow in the air. As the last of the storm subsided, Era stood alone in the hall, her breath steady, her heart warm despite the cold. She knew the battle was not over, but she had taken the first step toward reclaiming the balance she had lost. And as she turned to face the deeper chambers of the palace, she felt a glimmer of hope, a fragile but persistent light in the endless winter. Era stepped deeper into the ice palace, the glow of the ghost of Frost's fading presence still lingering in the air. The corridors narrowed, their walls reflecting her image in 1,000 fractured shards of ice, each one showing a different version of herself: angry, afraid, triumphant, despairing. The reflections whispered as she passed, their voices merging into an unsettling cacophony that pressed against her mind. This was no ordinary path. It was a trial. The palace was testing her, just as the ghost of Frost had warned. It was not enough to face the creature born of her magic. She would also have to face herself. She reached a great chamber, the heart of the palace, where the walls gleamed with a light that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. At its center stood a pedestal made of pure ice, and atop it lay a frozen orb that pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat encased in frost. Era knew without being told. This was the core of her spell, the source of the eternal winter. But before she could approach, the ghost of Frost reappeared, its form more solid now, as if it had drawn strength from the very palace itself. Its cloak billowed around it, and its eyes burned with renewed intensity. "You should have left," it said, its voice resonating with a cold, otherworldly power. "You cannot undo what you have wrought. This winter is mine now, as much as it is yours, and I will not let you destroy it." Era stood her ground, her breath visible in the icy air. "I didn't come here to destroy winter," she said. "I came to bring balance, to undo the harm I caused. And if I must face you again to do it, then so be it." The ghost's laughter rang out, sharp and brittle. "Face me! You do not understand. I am you, and you are me. This is not a battle you can win." Without warning, the ghost raised its hands, and a storm erupted around them. Snow and ice swirled in a violent vortex. The air filled with shards of frost that cut like knives. Era summoned her magic, casting a shield to protect herself. But the force of the storm was overwhelming, pushing her back, threatening to consume her. She retaliated, sending out waves of her own magic. Icy winds that clashed with the ghost's storm, creating a cacophony of roaring winds and shattering ice. The chamber shook with the force of their battle, the walls splintering, and the frozen orb at the center glowing brighter with each surge of power. But as the fight raged on, Era began to realize the futility of it. Every blow she struck, every spell she cast, only seemed to strengthen the ghost. It was as if her own magic was feeding it, the very essence of the eternal winter reinforcing its existence. "You cannot destroy me," the ghost said, its voice cutting through the storm like a blade. "You created me. Every ounce of power you wield, every spell you cast, only makes me stronger." Era faltered, her shield wavering as doubt crept in. The ghost surged forward, its form growing larger, more imposing, its cloak enveloping the chamber in shadow. And then she remembered the fox spirit's words. "Courage alone will not be enough. You must understand the price of what you seek to undo." Only when you embrace the warmth you have buried will the ghost of frost weaken. Lowering her hands, Era let the storm crash against her, her shield dissolving into mist. The ghost paused, its icy gaze narrowing in confusion. "I won't fight you anymore," Era said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "You're right. You are a part of me. But that means I can change you, just as I can change myself." The ghost recoiled as Era stepped closer, her hands outstretched. Closing her eyes, she summoned not the cold, but the warmth she had carried deep within her. The memory of sunlight breaking through the snow, of a spring breeze brushing against her cheek, of the laughter of children skating on frozen ponds. That warmth spread through the chamber, melting the frost on the walls, softening the storm into a gentle snowfall. The ghost of frost cried out, its form flickering, its edges blurring as the warmth unraveled it. "No!" it shouted, its voice filled with desperation. "You'll destroy me." "I'm not destroying you," Ira said, her voice soft but firm. "I'm setting you free." With a final piercing cry, the ghost dissolved into a cascade of snowflakes, each one shimmering briefly before vanishing. The storm faded and the chamber fell silent. The only sound the soft drip of melting ice. Eira turned to the frozen orb, its glow now dim and flickering. She placed her hands upon it, feeling the pulse of the magic within, and began to chant the incantation to end the eternal winter. The orb cracked, a single beam of light escaping, and the ground beneath her feet began to thaw. As the spell unraveled, Era felt a deep, aching sorrow mixed with a profound sense of relief. She had not defeated the ghost of frost. She had embraced it, accepted it as a part of herself, and in doing so, she had begun to restore balance. The first droplets of water fell from the ceiling, like tears of the palace itself, and Eira knew her journey was not yet over. But for the first time, she felt hope blooming within her heart, fragile but alive, like the first flower of spring breaking through the snow. As the final echoes of the ghost of frost's cries faded, the ice palace began to change. Its sharp crystalline edges softened, and its once gleaming surfaces dulled. The air grew heavier, not with cold, but with a profound stillness, as if the palace itself held its breath, waiting to see what Eira would do next. She stood before the cracked orb, its once steady glow now faint and unsteady, like the dying embers of a fire. The room seemed to pulse with her heartbeat, each sound reverberating through the walls, as if the palace and her magic were one. The time had come to undo the spell that had chained the land in eternal winter. Eira placed her hands on the orb, its surface cool and smooth, and closed her eyes, summoning the warmth she had found within herself. The incantation came not from memory, but from instinct, as if the words had always been within her, waiting for this moment. Her voice was steady, soft at first, then growing in strength. a melody that seemed to weave through the air like a spring breeze. As she spoke, the frost on the walls began to melt, rivulets of water streaming down like tears. The light within the orb flickered, then flared brightly, casting the chamber in a golden glow. The ground beneath her feet warmed, and she could feel the spell unraveling, the bonds of ice and snow dissolving under the force of her words. But with the unraveling came resistance. The remnants of the ghost of frost surged within the orb, a final attempt to preserve itself. The glow flickered, turning icy blue, and Aira felt a coldness creeping up her arms, threatening to freeze her where she stood. "You can't undo me," a voice whispered, faint but insistent, echoing in the corners of her mind. It was the ghost, clinging to life, its presence reduced to a shadow of what it once was. "I am your creation. Without me, you will be less than what you are." Aira's hands trembled, but she held firm, her voice rising above the ghost's whispers. "You are a part of me," she said, her tone resolute. "But you do not define me. I will not be bound by fear any longer." The warmth within her surged, flowing through her hands into the orb. The icy blue light flickered and faded, replaced by a warm golden hue that spread through the chamber, chasing away the last vestiges of cold. The ghost's voice faded into silence, its presence dissolving like mist in the morning sun. The orb shattered in her hands, not with a violent explosion, but with a gentle cracking, like the thaw of a frozen stream. Shards of ice fell to the floor, melting instantly, and in their place, a soft light filled the chamber, radiating outward. The spell was broken. Aira collapsed to her knees, the weight of her journey pressing down on her. She felt both drained and renewed, as if a part of her had been left behind in the ice. But something new had taken its place. A quiet strength, born of acceptance and understanding. Around her, the palace continued to melt, the walls turning to water that flowed in gentle stream toward the forest outside. She rose slowly, her legs unsteady, and made her way to the entrance. As she stepped outside, the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, casting the snow in hues of pink and gold. The air was still cold, but the promise of warmth lingered, a hint of spring in the icy breeze. The snow beneath her feet was softening, the first patches of earth beginning to show through. The forest was changing, coming alive in a way it hadn't for years. Birds sang tentative notes, their songs mingling with the sound of dripping water. The whispers of the trees, once cold and mournful, now carried a softer tone, as if they, too, felt the thaw. Aira walked through the forest, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what she had done, but lighter with the hope of what was to come. When she reached the edge of the village, she stopped, watching as the villagers emerged from their homes, their faces etched with wonder. They stared at the melting snow, the sun breaking through the clouds, and then at her. One by one they approached, their expressions a mixture of relief and gratitude. A child ran forward, her tiny hand reaching out to touch Era's cloak, as if to ensure she was real. "You saved us," the child whispered, her voice full of awe. Era knelt, placing a hand on the child's shoulder. "No," she said softly. "We saved each other." The villagers began to gather around her, their voices rising in murmurs of our thanks. But Iris' gaze drifted back to the forest, where the first buds of spring were beginning to bloom. She knew her journey was not over. There was still much to mend, both in the world and within herself. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of peace, standing in the sunlight, surrounded by the warmth of life returning to the land.